8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Project Egg Show. Today, we're still in Oklahoma City on a travel excursion this month until the end of June. So stay tuned for the updates there. But today, we have the honor of speaking with James Guldan, the owner of, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, Vision Tech Team.
Yep.
Now, I've done a little bit of reading up on James, and he's a total badass. So I was very excited James, to have you on the show today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ben.
Absolutely. Let's dive right in. First question for you, good sir. What is your story?
Yeah, so my story is interesting. So I started back in like my entrepreneurial journey, like most people started early. I actually started selling Pokemon cards, if you remember it back in the day. So I sold them at school way back in the day, got in some trouble. Apparently you're not supposed to do that. I started doing that stuff, started selling cell phones, like resale market. Back in high school, I was actually a mathlete back in high school. And I thought it was going to get me chicks, and it didn't. It was like it went the opposite way. So I went to college, went for computer science. I graduated in 2 years. So I started my first company called 24 Hour Tech Stud out of college. And yeah, it was a great name. But basically it was like an API programming company for entrepreneurs, and specifically in the marketing industry, to connect one software with another software. And it essentially got me into the internet marketing world. And from there, I started hiring a couple people. The 24-hour tech set was more of a software, high-end programming company. Then I met a guy by the name of Dmitry Kozlov, who I partnered with, and we started a company called Vision Tech Team. And we did that probably about, it must be like 6 or 7 years ago. Recently he exited, so I've been taking over the company last year and a half or 2 years or so, but kind of been evolving more from, personally from working a ton, kind of like being going from like 100-hour weeks to now like 3-hour weeks. So that's been kind of my transition over the last year and a half. It's kind of getting me out of the business and making sure I actually have something there that's really built as a legacy, rather than just something that's, only runs via me. And if I get injured or, something happens to me, the company's over. So that's kind of been my story so far.
So let's jump back to the Pokemon cards, because I remember so fondly growing up and collecting Pokemon cards. I had the binder, I organized them, and it's such fond memories. Why did you want to do that? Why did that call to you? And when you were so young?
Yeah, for me, it was like a big like I loved the game, like the Pokemon game was awesome, but I really saw like a massive opportunity in buying and selling these cards, because I went to like a pretty well-to-do school. My parents weren't well-to-do, but they had a lot of excess income, and a lot of people would value certain cards and they wouldn't. So I could buy some for very cheap, or like trade them for other things, and then I would sell them. So I made like, I don't know, it was like probably $600, $700 back in like 5th grade, which is that was like $1 million now, right? So it was like crazy, and obviously got in a lot of trouble because you're not supposed to be doing buying and selling stuff, especially at that age. And some people felt like they got taken advantage of. So, you don't really understand the rules. You don't understand refund policies, stuff like that. So, yeah, I got in a little trouble, but it kind of got me dabbling into the world of entrepreneurship.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear about this this idea of joining the mathletes to get girls. Like, I mean, first of all, let me just say, I'm all about math. I love math. I was the president of Mu Alpha Theta in high school, so I'm there with you. Interesting tactic though. What was your thought process?
Yeah, my plan was that like really successful people are good at math, And that's something that I wanted to be in. Like a lot of my heroes were like big into math. And it was, yeah, I wouldn't say it was the best, like the most efficient direction to go in if my goal was to get girls back in high school. It was probably the least efficient way.
The most roundabout.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You're taking triangles to get, yeah. Oh yeah. But it did help a ton. Like, I mean, obviously it was massive for getting into college. And like when I got into college, I mean, I had most of my, like it only took me 2 years to graduate with one bachelor's degree just because I had a majority of the credits already done. And they gave me a ton of credit for being the math lead. And like a lot of the stuff that I was doing then. And I eventually got 3 degrees to fill up the rest of the time. But yeah, I mean, it was a good path. Like I don't regret it, but it obviously didn't serve its purpose of what my original intent was.
Well, maybe not back then, but I'm sure that's now paid massive dividends later on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about those heroes that you mentioned. Who do you look up to?
Yeah, I mean, my hero back then was obviously like, I mean, it was always Bill Gates and like anybody really big in the computer industry. Like it tiered out to be Steve Jobs later, but this is kind of the time when Steve was taking some time off. But like in my mind, they were like super successful guys and really had it together. So I kind of followed their path, especially when it came to computer science. I was originally going to do radiology, go down the medical field, but I felt like that had a lot of capped income potential. So I decided to go into computer science, which would have helped me like fundamentally grow any sort of business from a hard skill set.
And do you feel like, was that really the whole tactical decision-making process of like, this could be the most useful skill, or like, did you have some sort of passion for it? Like what was the full story?
My passion was mainly for making money, right? Like income generation. That's like the whole reason I went to college. Otherwise, I just was going to continue down the entrepreneurship road. But I figured you'd have, with the hard skill set of computer science, you gain a lot more opportunities and you get a lot more. I mean, it just maxes out your income potential, especially when it comes to starting something out. It was the hardest to do is hire a good programmer. And so like back in high school and stuff, you know, you're dabbling in web design and web, you know, development, stuff like that. It was always the most expensive to hire like a chief developer. So I was like, all right, well, that's going to be my goal to do that. It also helps a ton when growing software or development companies is that, you know, I just know more than most people do and can hire more effectively and efficiently because I have that hard skill.
That's interesting. So then you started the 24-hour tech stud.
You got it. Yeah. I actually still own that domain.
That's an awesome name. And if
I was like looking for, I remember I just read a book about PR from a guy by the name of Bill Glazer. And it was like meant to make it pop, right? So that people wouldn't forget it. So yeah, I started a company and the name was 24-hour Tech Stud. Turns out that's a terrible company name because what happens is people think you're around 24/7. And like, granted I was, but it just really set a precedent and set some expectations that probably were not great for my health at the time. And, you know, it ended up with me working, you know, I was a majority of the business because I was the highest level tech for a long time. And like, I mean, I was living off of Adderall and Mountain Dew. I graduated college at 100 and I think it was like 118, 117 pounds.
Wow.
I looked like one of those kids Susan Sarandon sponsors. Yeah, it wasn't a great look. It was not a great look. Yeah.
That must have been tough. So you were going to school and you graduated very quickly and you were running your business.
Yeah.
Working these crazy hours all at the same time.
Yeah, my college experience wasn't fun, right? Like I'm always non-empathetic of everybody that's like, oh man, I wish I could go back to college. Because I'm like, you couldn't pay me to go back to college. It was terrible. And I'm not sure the time and efficacy was worth it, like getting those degrees, but ultimately it happened and it was a good foundation for me.
So what would you advise youngsters who are trying to make that decision?
Yeah, I'd get really clear on your goals, right? I mean, like one of my biggest passions is around strategic education. And it's kind of like why I started the company that I had. I mean, we had like a lot of people working for us. We still do, but it was like a massive tool for me to help grow. I mean, that's one of the things I enjoy most about the agency was kind of growing the people component and really putting your time and effort into helping others. And like one of the biggest things I would say is like just be pretty intentional about what your end goal is and really put time and effort into it. The things that make the most money are soft skills, not hard skills. So if you're ever going to put time and effort into something, get really good at your soft skills. If you're a good communicator, you're going to make way more money and be a lot more effective at your job than anybody with straight hard skills. Everybody knows an excellent programmer or an excellent mechanical engineer or somebody that they don't get along with other people, and nobody wants them, right? But the ones that do get along with other people can sell, can empathize, can have these soft skills. They really succeed way faster than the rest.
That's fascinating. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
How did you come to that conclusion?
So we have over the course of a long time, right? I mean, I probably trained 50, 60 people, if not more, directly with me on a lot of their soft skill goals, right? And it's like one of the biggest things, hard skills are very easy to learn, meaning that there's a definitive amount of time that you can spend into doing them that you'll get an output, right? Like Malcolm Gladwell has his 10,000 hours and you can become an expert at anything. But a hard skill only gets you in a narrow direction, but a soft skill translates pretty much everywhere. So if you're getting good at, things that we teach when any team member comes on, we have a training regimen, and it's basically soft skills training where it goes through like crucial conversations, catering to your environment, like making sure you have a good environment, making sure that you can communicate effectively, making sure that you ask the right questions, making sure that you kind of dig as deep as you need to without wasting somebody's time, making sure that there's, crucial thought processes involved in things, and just general ideas around how to solve problems with another human being rather than, hey, here's how you design things. Like, here's how you use Photoshop. Because those are great, but there's, Photoshop experts are a dime a dozen. Leadership level Photoshop experts are not.
I love that philosophy. I have a question for you though.
Yep.
When it comes to developing yourself, it seems like most people focus on the hard skills and they come from there, and then you have to add the soft skills on top in order to make those people more competitive, or let's just say yourself, like make yourself more competitive. What if you don't have the hard skills? Can you still just focus on the soft skills and still go on to do great things, or do you have to have some of the hard skills?
You have a harder time, right? The hard skills definitely open the door, where the soft skills make you excel. So if you don't have any hard skills, which I disagree that I don't think many people don't have hard skills, right? Like somebody's usually passionate about something and that just leads them to educating themselves about that, right? The problem is when somebody says, like, one of our biggest leadership problems is when I go, all right, well, let's talk about your quarterly education goals, right? And somebody goes, well, I want to learn more about Infusionsoft. And I go, okay, why do you want to learn more about Infusionsoft? And they're like, well, I think it's going to make me better at, communicating with clients or communicating with team members. And I go, well, why wouldn't you work on communicating with them rather than learning the hard skill? Like, or maybe spend an hour into, knowing enough about that hard skill to be able to communicate about it, but then working on your soft skills so that you can ask the right questions to be able to get this through. And most people, you walk them through this path and they go, totally get it. It's just like most people they're not an empty shell, right? They do have these hard skills. They just don't know how to fine tune them, or they're spending their time trying to put in their 10,000 hours. And it just puts you down such a narrow path that it doesn't let you pivot.
When did you realize, or maybe you always had the soft skills, but when did you realize that you needed to basically train yourself in these soft skills and develop those too?
Yeah, my big wake up call was when, you're working 100-hour weeks in college. It's not fun. Like nothing about that was very fun. And, I had a lot of low moments where it's like you liquidate your health because you're not eating right. You liquidate your friends and family because you're not spending the time that you need with them. you're liquidating a lot of things for this end goal. And ultimately you wake up and you're like, all right, well, I'm not making the amount of money that I want to. What am I doing wrong? And for me, it came to delegation. Like one of my unique skill sets is I'm probably one of the best delegators I know. And delegating, it's a skill, right? I mean, I have my 10,000 hours in delegating, and like the biggest accomplishment for me is being able to delegate myself out of my job. I mean, I have a multi-million-dollar company that runs itself. I don't really have to be there. So that's really cool for me of having that piece of it that, that's my idea of success, not graduating college or anything like that. So it started with the art of delegation, and I started delegating a little bit more and gaining more of my time back. And now I can work on the higher leverage things and then slowly delegating those to leadership or management staff, then getting higher level. And ultimately it grows the worth of your company exponentially, because now you get to focus on the things that you already know, the foundational stuff. Now you get to grow bigger without having to hire somebody with a bloated salary, where you don't have to hire that $500,000 person because you were that $500,000 person.
That makes a lot of sense. So as you're going through this journey and you're having these realizations, you're getting really good at the soft skills, and you're probably really good at the hard skills too, just because you put so much time into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
At what point, do you have to go through those things versus learning it from being taught by others? Like, does somebody have to go through a similar journey, or can they shortcut it? And I don't mean shortcut it as in like get rich quick, but like, do they have to go through all that pain that you went through?
Yeah, if they're smart, right? But ultimately, there's a lot of value in hitting rock bottom. I mean, there's a lot of value in there. I mean, there has to be enough pain for you to find another solution, because there's a lot of positive reinforcement. And a lot of what I'm seeing recently is most issues with businesses scaling or trying to get up to a level is more the personal development of the ownership than it is anything else, right? So it's not the business model issue. It's not anything else other than the owner of the business has massive personal development issues where they don't want to put their time into these pieces. So I think for them to kind of burn out and see there's got to be a better way, like I'm willing to throw this thing into the trash rather than continue it, there's a massive value in that. Now, outside of that, that's how I learn, is like I need to be able to see the rock bottom and like really crash and burn. But obviously, if you kind of take a look at anybody who's built a successful business, is they've made a lot of $1 million mistakes, like a lot of $1 million mistakes, and you never forget them. You never forget them.
What have been some of those biggest mistakes you made, those $1 million mistakes?
Yeah, my health was a big one. And I would consider that more than $1 million mistake of liquidating your health for cash. You always think, okay, it'll get better. I'm young enough. I'll champ this out for now. But it's like, you always need to look out for yourself first. One of our massive core values, one of my favorite core values, is selfless service. And selfless service has a side piece of it, is make sure you look out for yourself first and take care of yourself in order to help others out. And really making sure that you take care of your health. Like it's really your best asset is you. I mean, seriously, your best asset is you, especially when you're starting out. A sickness can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars when you're starting out. So it's like making sure that you are a finely tuned machine. You really take care of yourself. Like one of the big things I used to use tobacco, and I was like, got to cut that out, like cutting out caffeine, cutting out like pretty much anything that I didn't really serve me, was a big piece, because it just, I was getting sick, or I, low energy or something else. And just making sure you take care of yourself was probably one of the biggest value pieces I've ever had. And then I have some, other ones that are less translatable, like don't get into the software industry when you've no idea about it. Like don't delegate things that you don't know about, like understand those pieces. Like ultimately business partnerships, like be very upfront with them in the beginning on how, because a business partnership is a very technical thing and it's going to evolve. At one point, one side's going to have more value than the other. It's going to happen. It always does. So make sure that in the beginning you have those conversations before you have them at the end. And I guess those are the heavy hitters. I mean, for me, it's like kind of like also working on personal development rather than hard skills. Like I think everybody needs to focus on themselves a lot more and educate themselves. I mean, anybody who's making a real difference in the world reads at least a book a week. I mean, that's just something that happens. Like it's one of those pieces where if you're not reading as much as you possibly can, you're going to be left behind.
I love that. I love that, especially because I've been going through this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, for the 4th time.
It's one of my favorites. It's one of the fundamental books of anybody's life should be How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's incredible.
I agree. I totally agree. And just as a case in point, I was telling you before we went live, one of my mentors, his name is Ben Gothard. Shout out to you, Ben, you rock. And he's actually he's the last living protege of Dr. Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, one of the best-selling self-help books of all time. And he got his knowledge from Andrew Carnegie. So that's like a very strong lineage of people who know what they're talking about. And so Ben was telling me the very evil Charles Manson, like super evil guy, very influential, very, very influential, could bring a stranger into his cult, like clockwork, right? So Ben was visiting him in prison because he was curious. And my mentor asked Charles, how did you do that? Like, how do you manipulate people and influence people and impact them in such a way that they literally will kill for you? And he pointed to that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He's like, that's exactly how.
Yeah.
So if he can use that for that much evil and like do that much with that book, imagine what we can use it for, like, for good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, soft skills are incredible, right? I mean, like really understanding how to empathize with somebody gets you from A to B so much more effectively. Like really increasing communication and really being able to understand the other person's perspective puts you in a class outside of anybody else. A lot of people just want to feel heard.
So let's talk about the empathy. Like, how do you get better at that? Like, how do you get better at empathy? How do you train the empathy muscle?
Yeah. So one, there's a lot of reading on this, right? And it's a massive subculture, and like really understanding another person's perspective is more around, like, a lot of people think it's basically you need a ton of life experience, but in reality, it's just get really good at communicating and asking the right questions. So for example, you're incredible at this, right? Like you're one of top 10 I've ever seen at getting really clear and asking the right questions, right? So having that skill gets you to take your experience and build it on them, right? So that you can empathize with their situation. So anybody can find 3 things that they have in common with somebody, and that builds rapport, right? Once you have the principle of, like, the 7 principles of influence, so once you have the principle of likability with that person, you really open them up. And the empathy component more comes from finding commonality and like really understanding that we're all here for the same reason. And like just getting everybody on the same page, and then, communicating, okay, what is it that you actually want? So asking, okay, well, why, until you really understand the purpose of what they're doing. Most people don't ask why, they just say what, what do you want me to do, rather than why do you want me to do it? And when you understand the why of somebody, you really understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and you can pivot more, right? You can make leadership decisions based on a why, where you can only make production level decisions based on a what.
I love that.
Simon Sinek has an amazing talk about that.
I love that. So I'm very curious now about asking questions, and I appreciate you saying that, by the way. Like, what exactly do you mean by that? Well, what about somebody's questions makes them good at asking questions? Like, why did you say that?
So one of the things that it's a skill, right, is micro expressions. So one of these pieces, hence the reason why in our company, everybody does video calls. because you can see micro expressions. What somebody says is very little of their content, right? So you can actually gain more access to them by reading what they're saying subconsciously rather than, what it's like the subconscious. It was a book I was reading. Subconscious dictates like 90% of your decisions, right? So what you say and how you feel are two very different things usually. So you can tell how somebody's feeling. Like, for example, if they're uncomfortable, you can kind of get them out of that. If you see that they're uncomfortable, you can relax them a bit. You can say, hey, it looks like you're a little uncomfortable. Let's kind of take a deep breath. Like, how are you doing? You take it away from that, whatever conversation that made them uncomfortable, and then move back in rather than just hammer them on it. You can also do, there's a ton of techniques on question asking, right? Like there's like one of the good games that I like to play is the 20 questions game. Like, can you get somewhere in 20 questions? Because it gets you more acclimated with really thinking about what you're asking, right? Instead of just doing something to do it, like, oh, hey, how was your day? You'd ask something strategic, like, instead of, hey, how was your day? It's, hey, how come you're in whatever city you're in, or something like that. So you can learn a little bit more about their life and move forward. But ultimately, it's more strategic than just asking random questions. It's more or less like trying to figure out what you want out of the conversation and then figure out the most efficient way to get there.
A lot of what I've heard from this conversation has been about being really clear about what you want.
Yeah.
Being very intentional and strategic about moving there, getting there almost as efficiently and effectively as possible, which I love. I do think that a lot of people struggle with knowing what they want, though.
Yeah, recently it's been I've had a string of people that I've been coaching and talking to that have been, it's a real thing, right? Like a lot of people, hey, what are your goals? And they go, I don't have any. Like I frankly, some people don't want them, right? And it's like, it's a real thing, right? There is value in not having goals and the fact that you can live in the present moment. You can do a lot more extemporaneous stuff. In reality, goals are a general direction, right? Like, do you always get there? There's a lot of stats on does goal setting work, right? It's kind of 50-50 on whether or not like goals actually get you to where you want, or is it more or less, kind of, are you living extemporaneously and living in the moment and then kind of gains you in that direction of wherever you're most passionate about. So for me specifically, I enjoy goal setting. And I actually do goal setting for, so I do like 5 years, 3 years, 1 year. 5 years is like super generic. But then I set quarterly goals, monthly goals, weekly goals, daily goals. I actually journal every morning to kind of make sure I'm keeping on track with it. And ultimately I set education goals as well. So they correlate with it because a lot of the bigger issues that you have and the goals that you're trying to get aren't just a time component, right? It's an education component. Who do you have to be that person? If you want to make $100,000 a year, you have to be worth $100,000 a year, right? So it's like you need to figure out how you need to educate yourself to get to that point. And I feel like a lot of value, especially in this day and age, is information and education.
I love that. And those are two of the three pillars of what I believe this show is about, which is education. And I also think like inspiration is part of it and conversation. But mainly I was focusing on the education part. I think that's huge. And it's fascinating to me how the people that you've been talking to recently, some of them are just like, I don't want goals. I'm not having goals. Like,
well, I was never experienced it, right? Like,
yeah, me neither.
Yeah, for me, again, there was no empathy component. I thought that it's so weird to have like a core value be questioned so hard so many times of like my values, like you got to create goals to get you in a direction. And so I was seeing a lot of successful people saying like, I think goals are stupid. And I'm like, I can't fight with results at all. But it's, one of those things where I fundamentally disagreed with it until I dug into it. I'm still going to do goal setting. That's just the way that I'm set. I enjoy doing that. But there can be success without goal setting. And it's one of those pieces where I recently found out that that's, a successful path. And if you don't like setting goals, you can still be successful.
I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. So in your course of study, your self-education program, what does that look like? Like, how do you educate yourself?
Yeah, so mainly books. And you had mentioned something before this, which I thought was incredibly insightful. Before you did the pre conversation here, which was a book you can fine tune and you can polish, but a podcast you can. And recently, I've kind of strayed away from listening to a lot of podcasts because it's in my mind, I probably have like 200 books I want to read, right? So it's like for me, somebody has put a lot more effort into writing a book, right? And they've kind of fine tuned and polished these ideas and doing these pieces. But ultimately, there's a lot of education in podcasts too. You learn a lot more about, I mean, separating the content from the author is two very different things, right? Because you see a lot of people where when they're extemporaneously speaking, they really don't live out their book and like never meet your heroes, right? Because it's just like ultimately it's one of those pieces where how they portray themselves is different than how they actually are, like a majority of the time. So it's kind of like separating those two. But how I really do my education path is, so I have like a 3-year goal. Like my 5-year goal is like generic, super generic. My 3-year goal, a lot more specific, which kind of gets me to, okay, where do I want to be? Like my most recent 3-year goal was I want to be out of the company. I don't want to be dependent on my company. I don't want to be there, right? So I had to educate myself on delegation, like a lot of these training, automating education, like really hiring the right people, like really getting fine-tuned onto how to grow a business that grows itself, which is a totally different game than growing a business. So it was kind of like educating myself on that. And that's my 3-year goal. So it starts with like one of them was personal development. Like what do I need to work on for myself to figure this out? The second one, this is my second quarter, was like around financial education, like really educating myself on, you see all these $30,000 millionaires where they buy these things that they can't afford. And that was definitely me. I mean, I had like a Lamborghini and I had all this stupid shit that I definitely didn't need, didn't want, didn't serve me. And it was like, if you're top 1% income in America and you're spending the same amount, you're really not growing wealth. So that was like a massive piece for me recently of like in the last 2 years of like really figuring out how I want to grow my assets for them to grow themselves. Like it separates the rich from the wealthy. And that was one of the big pieces that I wanted to do, was have enough asset streams that I don't have to work anymore. And then also having a business that's my main income stream that I don't have to be there anymore. So it's more of an investment. So like personal finance was a big one. I mean, a lot of it's just been around mindset, and like really becoming the person who is that person. Like it was really hard for me to go from running the company to not running the company, because you have a lot of your ego built in working a lot and telling people that you work a lot. And it's, it's the Gary Vaynerchuk mindset of like, I'm hustling my balls off, look at me. And now it's like, it sucked. I hated it. Like on the front, it looked great. I was making a ton of money, but it was just liquidating everything I had. So, like really figuring out strategically what you need to learn from like a massive goal set, and then kind of breaking it down into, okay, there's that. I usually read, like recently I've had more time because I'm not working that often. So I've been going through like a couple books a week, but ultimately like before I was probably doing 1 book a week. And it's easy with Audible and other, other things they have now is like, when you're on your way to the gym or anywhere else, you can really educate yourself. Getting rid of sports, like not watching any sports if you don't have the time. Like seriously, education is going to gain you way more than having conversational skill sets in football. Stuff like that is just like a, for me, a necessity of like getting rid of anything that doesn't really serve me. But yeah, I mean, I think it's all around like just strategically figuring out what you want to learn, like what the end goal is, and then kind of breaking it down into segments.
I love that. And I love how it seems like you're very well organized with your life and everything that you're doing. And I think it's a very powerful way to go about it. Like especially a very systematic growth plan. I think of somebody like Benjamin Franklin, who I believe I mentioned to you is one of my heroes. He had this self-development regiment that he took himself through, and he actually didn't stick with it for very long, but he developed the framework for it, which I think is brilliant, where he had like a certain number of virtues. I think it was like 13 virtues or something similar to that. In fact, it was 13 virtues. And they were things that he wanted to improve about himself, and that he thought if you could master these 13 things, then you would be an effective person, a good person. And so he went about and he literally graded himself every day on those virtues. And it was, and there were 13. So if you think of in a year, if you focus on one a week, you could get through the course 4 times. And so I'm pretty sure my math is right there, but you could get through it four times. And each week you focus on a new one and you just keep going and keep going through it for the rest of your life. Like, that is brilliant to me. That is brilliant. It seems like you've taken a very systematic approach to your development.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I don't think that's the only way, right? Like, I think there's a lot of different ways to educate yourself, but for me, it's worked. Definitely, like, I enjoy structure. So kind of mapping everything out was a really effective way for me to kind of make sure and reduce anxiety of, like, I always know what book I'm going to read. And like, everybody's trying to push books on you all the time, but if you're learning a specific segment of education, you say no a lot more effectively. So it's like, for me, it's a lot easier to make decisions if you know what your end goal is, because you can say no way more effectively. That's one of the biggest things I found that helps me scale, is saying no to 98% of everything. And that way your yeses actually matter. So if you commit to something, it's intentional and you're doing it for the right reasons. You're not wasting time and taking away from the opportunity cost of something else.
I love that. Let's talk about that shift from working 400 million hours a week to now, I believe you said, well, I don't want to, if you're not comfortable sharing how many hours you work now, I don't want to be the one to.
Yeah. It's about 3, maybe max. So it's a lot, less than it was before. And it's a pretty intentional shift.
Yeah. So how's that been? Like, what have you done with all this new time? How's that impacted your life?
Yeah, it's a new problem. It's like finding stuff to do with that time is a lot more difficult than it was to just continue down the path of just hustling and trying to grow the business. So for me, it was the biggest wake up call I had was recently I went through a divorce. And so for me, it was like the biggest wake up call I ever could have gotten was somebody being, it was like my primary relationship being like, hey, this isn't working for me. I'm out, and it's like, oh shit. Okay. This kind of makes sense. I need to start focusing on other things, and really kind of reevaluate a lot of the primary driving factors that I had. Because my main goal was family, right? Like making sure that everything's done for the purpose of my family. And when that part breaks apart, it kind of makes you reevaluate a lot of things. So for me, it was kind of like, okay, well, and I'm most likely going to go back to working again. But for me, I wanted to test and dabble into the fact of, okay, can I go a full year without, being 100% involved in the company or doing any of these other things? It also makes the company way more autonomous, and you can see a lot bigger issues more quickly when you're not in it.
So where have you now invested your time since you have so much more of it?
Yeah, working out. A lot. So I work out 3 times a day on average, which is probably more than I should. Like, I've taken my narcissism from the business environment to like working out now, which I'll deal with that when it comes up. But ultimately it served me pretty well, like just to kind of get back in shape and like just, really eat way more intentionally. I do like yoga in the morning, because I still wake up at the same time. Like I usually go to bed at like toddler hours. I'm in bed by 8 p.m. and I'm up pretty early. So it's like when I wake up, I have a hot tub and a cold tub here. I do like a cold plunge every morning. I love that. It's one of my like necessities. And so basically I'll do that, then yoga for about an hour, while I read or while I'm listening to an audiobook or, meditating. Then around noon, I'll do hiking. I've been into climbing recently, like rock climbing. really fun. Really fun. And then I do an actual workout like later in the day. So yeah, but it's served me pretty well for the last couple months, and we'll see how long it lasts. But for me, it's there's a lot of time being spent on working out. Like you can, do a ton.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that regimen because you're literally just expanding in the, one of my mentors taught me that there are 7 core disciplines in life in which we can make progress. And, the physical discipline is one of the 7. It's very important, but like you're growing physically, you're growing intellectually because of the reading, you're growing spiritually because of the meditation and journaling. And then you have so much space to grow in all the other areas too. Like, I love that. I think that's brilliant.
Well, ultimately, it makes you a lot more marketable, right? People like hanging out with like-minded people. Again, the principle of likability. So it's like you get along. Most highly functioning people are fit, healthy. You know what I mean? They have their shit together. So it's like you're going to get along a lot more with people that are like-minded. So kind of getting my life back in order. And it's just, health to me is one of those big things where like it's instrumental. And if you don't have it, like what is it? The sick person, or no, the healthy person has 1,000 dreams. The sick person has 1. So it's like really, I had a lot of health problems recently, and like it's just been a nightmare trying to get back into shape and getting everything back. But I haven't had any health problems in the last 5-6 months. So it's been really cool.
Are you preparing for like a big hike, like going to tackle a huge mountain or something like that?
I wish. The big thing for me was, so my goal was to be in the best shape of my life at age 30, right? I just turned 30 years old. And my goal was to be in better shape when I turned 30 than I ever was in my life. And I did that. And it was great. It was awesome. My KPIs were bench press, squat, hiking, like just general aesthetics, and just general how healthy I think I am, like my well-being. But anyway, it's amazing, like kind of just to reevaluate and just kind of go through and look after myself. And especially with the time that I had after the divorce was a lot of time for myself, which was great. I finally got an opportunity to kind of just work on myself and do a lot of those pieces, which, I kind of neglected for a really long time. And for me, it's maybe a much more effective leader. I can now handle situations way more effectively than I could when I was busy or, just wasn't in the right mindset. Because I think that's a big piece of ownership, is really solving the biggest problems. And the biggest piece there is differentiating between not your problem and your problem. And if you can, differentiate, you gain a lot more time and effort into, solving the crucial conversations or crucial problems as effectively as possible.
When you made the shift from the working all the time lifestyle to like, now I feel like you're growing in way more areas of your life, did your circle of friends change? Like, how did that impact you socially?
I actually had, like, my circle of friends were there, and then I needed to catch up. So that was one of those big things where it was a really interesting, it was a really interesting thing of being like, a lot of the people that I was hanging out with were doing these. And my mindset was like, all these hippies, what are they doing? And ultimately, you go down the path and you're like, man, a lot of this stuff is, clarity of mind. So meditation was a big one, right? Meditation is one of those things where you can gain, I think it makes me, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year more by meditating. Like just being in a state of mind where you can handle problems, and you start that in the morning and you end that at night, reduces anxiety, increases your clarity, increases your ability to do crucial problem solving. Like there's just so many advantages to it. I don't understand why people don't do it. Like there's just so much opportunity cost in not meditating that I for me specifically, I don't understand why others don't. Journaling was another piece that I really enjoyed doing, was ultimately putting your thoughts to paper and like kind of making a map in the morning and at night. Okay, what am I going to do? Mine starts with, I do appreciations. Like I'm the first one, I appreciate myself and like why I appreciate myself every day. And then go through like other people in my life that I appreciate. So you start out on like, you start and end on a really positive note. Then I go through like what needs to happen today and what needs to happen tomorrow. And are those in alignment with my bigger goals? Like, are they things I should be doing, or are they things I need to cancel and reschedule? And then I do, the last section is what I learned, right? So it's like, if I go 3 days on a book without writing down any key takeaways, that book is gone.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, it just helps to be able to, you know, filter through books that you find, because certain books can be incredibly relevant at different times in your life, right? Like How to Win Friends and Influence People, I try to read at least once a year, right? That's an incredible book where every year you get different takeaways. Like I'm sure if I read it every week, I'd get different takeaways. So it's just kind of like making sure that you get takeaways from it and that book is providing value. Because I mean, some of these books are, you know, 23 hours where it's like that's a massive amount of time that if you're not gaining any insightful information from it, switch to something else.
I love that. I love that. So I'm really interested in asking you this question because of the transformation that you've had in your life. I mean, that is a huge transformation, and I am so profoundly curious about that. But I want to ask you, what is your philosophy on developing deep, meaningful, and genuine connection with other human beings?
Yeah, I think if you don't, it catches up with you, right? Like, I mean, you can fake it till you make it for a long time, where it's like, if you genuinely want something out of somebody, it's hard, like just from a micro expression, just from like the way that you communicate, just from a lot of things, you can definitely tell. Over the course of time, it comes out. And ultimately, the people in my experience that float to the top are people that have transformational experiences rather than transactional. And there are places where transactional communication happens, where it just happens, right? But trying to be more transformational in the things that you do, like, hey, how can I help, creates such a bigger value on both sides than how can you help me? So it's like, I try to find as many people as possible that start with helping first. Like, I mean, look what you're doing. I mean, with your podcast is like one of those pieces is you ask how I can help first. And now at the back end of this, you gain a lot more transformational relationships. So, I mean, I've found over my experience that you get real value out of transformational experiences. You get short-term value out of transactional.
I love that. How do you, like, let's say you want to be a part of transformational experiences and you want to give that, or at least help to create that with other people, but you just don't know how. Like, how do you, first of all, how do you do it? And maybe there's not just one scientific way to reach it, but how do you get to that place of understanding to be able to do it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of empirical data on givers, right? So there's a book, it's called Givers and Takers or something like that. And basically it states, so who gains the most, givers or takers, right? It's actually neither, right? So who gains the most is somebody who can strategically give, right? You need to actually be a strategic giver because people take your time, right? There are people out there that you just strategically should not be giving to. Like, obviously you start first, but ultimately need to be able to do it with a strategic investment, right? Of being like, okay, I can help this person out, but ultimately if they're not going to kind of take your information and do a lot of this other stuff, it isn't worth your time. So, and you can also do it in a very strategic way, right? There are certain skills that all of us have that you can give somebody and it actually provides a ton more value than you think. So it's making sure that you give in a way that adds exponential value rather than you being pissed and them being unhappy, right? Like, hey, I can help you with, you know, if you wanted $1,000 loan, I could give it to you, but ultimately you didn't really want the loan and I'd be mad that I did it, right? So it's like, that's a terrible way to give, where it'd be more strategic for me to do consulting with a nonprofit or something like that, where I can actually grow them foundationally rather than just giving $1,000.
I love that. Dude, you've been dropping some red hot fire on this during this
conversation. I promise you, it's a lot of the books, and I've been going through quite a few recently.
So when you look ahead, and I know you say you do the 5-year goals, but and the 3 and the 1 and the quarterly, monthly, weekly, where do you want to be? Let me rephrase the question. When other people look back 10,000 years from now, what do you want them to remember about you?
Yeah, it's a good question. My biggest mission is solving education. So I think the biggest thing broken in most, let's say first, second, and third world countries is, and I mean, I didn't mean third world, I meant developing. But in most developing countries and above is the education process. Like the United States is one of the worst education in first world. So, and ultimately, if you can solve education in developing countries, you can actually solve a majority of their problems. So it's kind of like making sure that that piece is there. So my biggest path is specifically solving the education path. And right now, I mean, there's a lot of like, I have a foundation that's catered towards it, that I'm on the leadership for. There's some other stuff that, I mean, like ultimately my business is catered around mainly info products, which is self-education. There's a lot of businesses that I'm involved in that are catered around the education industry. That's just because I'm so passionate about solving that piece of really educating people in a way that they get educated best in. Like some of the smartest and most successful people I know were terrible in school. Like they were really bad in school, really created a structure that made them feel incompetent or inferior. And if you can solve a lot of those pieces, you've now created an education force that is 20 to 30 times bigger than it is right now. A lot of people that are really good at school are really bad at life. And I mean that in like, going from 4.0 to solving the world's problem on, insert whatever is a totally different game, right? So it's like figuring that piece out. And a lot of people that are willing to take the risks aren't the people that get the 4.0. So the people that go, okay, well, let's, this is good enough. Let's try to solve something else.
What do you think is the solution to, like, for example, the United States? What's the solution to our education problem?
Yeah, I think that we're very soon going to have an AI system that can educate kids based on how they learn. So ultimately figuring out the best learning path for each child. So individual education is one, right? Like I think that that's the best path to possibly go in. Like obviously outside of there, there's augmented possibilities like increasing, using hardware and other things with the brain and other cool possibilities you can do. But ultimately, I think coming up with a customized learning path for kids will get them into an area that they are passionate about and can educate them way quicker with way more success than putting them in an environment where it's kind of like everybody learn this specific way. And hopefully some people will be fine with it. Like I had ADD and ADHD growing up and the school environment was a nightmare for me. I hated it. Absolutely hated it. I learned more on my own than I ever did in school. And it was one of those, like, thank God I love the education piece of it. I just didn't like how I was being educated in school. So I kind of went my own path. So that was like a big piece for me and kind of why I'm so passionate about fixing those pieces is, the United States is one of the lowest in education for the first world countries.
Wow. I really do think something with AI is the answer because, like you said, everybody learns in their own unique way. And if there was a system like an artificial intelligence that could like figure that out and give people very individualized attention, wow, that could be really, really powerful. How far out do you think we are from that sort of reality?
Yeah. So with that piece, I mean, I was just reading a book recently where it's like every problem that has a marketable goal gets solved more effectively, right? So if there's a financial backing to it, it's way quicker solved. I actually think there's more financial backing to solving the workforce issue in developing countries than I do in first world. So I think you had asked what I think the issue or what the solution was in a first world country like the United States, but in a developing country, it's way easier. They just need the internet. Like in reality, they can get exponentially more education by having access to the internet. YouTube is incredible. Like there's so many ways for them to learn on their own if they have access to the internet. I mean, there's lower socioeconomic status in the United States that has a difficult time getting access to the internet, but if somebody really wanted to, they could. Where in developing countries, it's a lot more difficult.
That's fascinating. Very, very.
But I think anybody that solves it, there's going to be a lot of cash there, right? Because ultimately, if you provide the infrastructure for a lot of those pieces, you now have the power to control that piece of it. And that gives you, I mean, like look at Africa. I mean, there's so many people there. If you can solve an education piece, it's going to be more production level education initially, but ultimately that would be a massive have.
But what infrastructure would actually be there? I mean, is it really just the internet, or is it providing the platform to aggregate the knowledge and the information?
Well, I think developing its internet first, like really getting foundational internet. I mean, there's so many people in, let's say, Africa or Philippines or, you know what I mean, that don't really have access to internet or reliable internet. And if that happens, it stunts the growth. Like in Africa, you'll find a lot of places where they're being taught by people who aren't qualified to teach anything. And when you think, you know, they think things, you know, there's places where it's like Mountain Dew is a birth control. You know, it's like, you know, you get these pieces where it's like you have such an education gap where it's like it would blow your mind. So it's like once you get that foundational education, you can really grow an area much quicker.
Wow. Well, James, I want to thank you very, very much for coming on the show today and you know, sharing this time with me. It's been fascinating, and I'm truly honored to have been able to share this time with you. So thank you.
Awesome. I really appreciate it. Great questions, by the way.
Thank you. Well, you know, I'm really just trying to listen to what you say. So if they were great, they're because of something that you said. So. You know, I want to thank you again, and to everybody who's watching and or listening. I want to thank y'all very much because your time is very valuable, and I'm very grateful that you would choose to share it with us today. So y'all rock. Y'all are the best. I love y'all very, very much, and I will see you on the next episode.